Good morning, everybody, and this is the Vedanta Series Question and Answer. We have some 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 participants here live. I hope they're alive anyway. And this is their opportunity actually to break their silence and ask some questions. If there are no questions, there are no answers. Before we commence, we say our normal prayer for teacher and student. And you can all join in this. All right. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both in terms of our studies and other things. May we work together with great energy. May we have our studies illumined. May we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace beyond all.
Is the development of willpower, is that based on self-awareness and thought control? By that I mean that you're aware of your own thought flow and you replace less favorable or dysfunctional thoughts by ones that are more functional and more less unfavorable.
Yes. Next question. So I don't know if you all got the question. Is willpower. What we call tapasya is really the direction of will. And we have that faculty of will to act. Will is not a causal thing. It is an effectual thing. What do I mean by that? You see, we have the subject called free will, but actually it's a contradiction in terms, because to exercise will, supposing I want to will, or a will to move a chair from A to B, a chair has to precede it. And there must be a reason why I want to do it. Now, the great philosopher Schopenhauer thinks that will is the ultimate. Swami Vivekananda disagrees with his conclusions, even though Schopenhauer derives all his philosophy from Buddhism and the Upanishads. So will is not a causal thing. It's a secondary cause, no doubt, but not a primary cause. Why should we exercise any willpower? And you see this term will and power going together, because when you direct a certain energy that we call resolution, or will, taking energy and directing it deliberately, consciously, systematically, scientifically in a certain way will yield some benefit. So in the context of spirituality, what we call tapasya is actually exercising will in the sense of self-control, because the opposite is lack of control. We take the condition of the mind at any state, at any time, we will see that it is not in a state of what we call ekagra, one-pointedness. We think our attention is scattered all over the place. It's easy to understand that. Try to meditate if you're not used to meditating. You might think of a green field in front of you. Then the next thought will be, did I put the green jersey in the wash? And then what about, green is the color of Ireland, and then Irish music, and you can go off at a tangent, multiple tangents. The important thing is you can track all these diversions. And that means I'm not the mind, I'm not the thought current that flows. What arrives at my substation called mind is a current, is also a subtle energy, the most subtle energy which is existing in the universe. And the yogic language for this energy is called prana. Prana universal energy. Don't think it's your individual energy. It is simply arriving at your substation as the body, as the energy that drives the body, and its most subtle variety will be psychic prana, otherwise called thought. Thought is the most powerful thing that we have. It is by consciously directing this thought, that we exercise our willpower. Because what we call desire doesn't happen on the sense level, the physical sense level. It happens before that. And the sense level is just the expression of what you want internally. So desire for objects is preceded by a desire for the subtle version of it in the head and the benefit that you derive from it, and the mistake that I am deserving of things. But you see, we only have the right to do one thing. We only have the right for one thing. What is it? One activity. Do you know what it is? Work, exactly. Bhagavad Gita says you don't have these human rights that we are so favored about. The secular life says the right for this, the right for that, the right for self-expression, the right to think that you have your own body and you can do what you like with it. According to the Bhagavad Gita, none of these, or Krishna, none of these you have a right to, except right to work. That means you don't have the right to the effects or the fruits of your work. So this means if you take this seriously, you have to change your language, because you don't have a house. You don't have a bank account. You don't have clothing. You don't have a body. You don't have a mind. All these have to be re-registered to somebody else's account. So the devotional language for this is Lord of the universe, or God, registered to that account. Lord, this is your body. This is your housing. This is your temple. Not mine. Remove the I and me from it, and now you have a different way of thinking, a different way of understanding. So does that mean that if there's no I or mine, we have no foundation to exercise a willpower? We have no freedom. Free will is not ours. And this understanding of freedom and will, these two words do not go together, because, as I say, if I will to move a chair from A to B, then something independent of the chair has to be there. A non-chair has to be there. Me being non-chair, I can take a chair and move it. Wherever there is this combination of decision-making and activity, two things arise, a subject and an object. I, being the subject, have the freedom to move something, an object, but not total freedom, because every decision where I say I have free will is really free choice. Every decision I make is to weigh up alternatives. What are these alternatives? They're called Shreyas and Preyas. I have the decision to make either to go in this direction or that direction. The great saint singer, Tyagaraja, he gives this choice in a song. The king invites him to a feast. And inviting him to a feast, he has a conversation with his mind. Oh, my mind, like a kindly uncle, he talks it. Oh, my mind. Make up your mind whether you want to, what you want to do. You can go to the king's invitation and have a sumptuous feast there. You'll enjoy many things. But I'm leaving it up to you to see what is more valuable. Or you can taste the sweet nectar of the Lord's name. You can engage in the divine company, practicing the presence of the divine and getting the sweetness from there, saturating the mind with the nectar of that. Which would you prefer? One is permanent, one is impermanent. One is constant, one comes and goes. You'll have a nice feast, you'll satisfy the taste buds, maybe enjoy nice company and so on and so forth. But it'll only last for an hour, 2 hours. And then the memory is there and hankering can be there. But disappointment is there that it doesn't last beyond that period of time, nor is it possible to. You ask a child, what is heaven? The child might say, unlimited ice cream. All right. Supposing you now have the capacity to deliver this 1 ton of ice cream to the child's doorstep, please eat to your heart's content. After a few mouthfuls, you'll get tired of it and say, I'm feeling a little squeezy here. The ice cream is not sitting so well. It's impossible to eat a ton of ice cream. Despite the fact that number 7 say no, more is better, no. You may have that perception. So every object of the senses will have a limited shelf life. And you'll get tired of it and it won't be fully satisfying. So you have a choice to make. Everybody has a choice to make. And nature has an inbuilt mechanism to force you where there's a pain more acute than anything else, normally to do with death, bereavement, and so on, where you're forced into a reevaluation of things. This is described as 2 birds on a tree in the Mundaka Upanishad. One radiating at the top, full and free and perfect. One tasting the bitter and sweet fruits of life. Something like in the summer in Ireland where you have blackberries and you taste one and your face immediately says that it's not as sweet as you thought it was, but the next one is sweet. You have no way of judging. So experience is a wonderful, wonderful teacher. We are here in the gymnasium, says Swami Vivekananda, puts it in that language, those kinds of concepts. So if you make a choice, then it requires then to sustain that by the exertion of will. You have the free will to start with, or the free choice. But freedom itself is not accessible to you. It's only that if you make the right choices and develop a new habit that will open the way to freedom. It's a bit like Ramakrishna's example. So you have a calf or a cow in a field, and you tie a rope to it, and the rope is tied to a pole, but you give a long enough rope for the cow to meander around the field and taste the grass and so on. It thinks it has the freedom, but it doesn't. It's always tethered to a pole. In many farms today, you'll see that the fence is electrified. And the cow now knows, if I go that, I get a shock. That enters into its memory, and it knows I won't go to that extent. I won't go near that fence. So, despite that, it roams around thinking that it is free. We are no different from it. And when we have a conversation, we have to make sure that every conversation, of course, that you have is all with yourself. Every conversation is with yourself, whether somebody is there or not. If nobody is there, it's a monologue. Well, then see that it is of some kind of value. There's a story about a preacher. It's a Jewish story, actually, so we call it a rabbi, who decided that he would go and preach to all the rural areas he could find. So he gathered a whole group of farmers together and gave them a nice lecture on philosophy. But then he noticed that most people were asleep. Even so, that didn't discourage him. He said, I have something valuable to say. He continued to say. Then he noticed, if one person remains awake, I'll think this is quite valuable. The others are just dullards. But he noticed in the audience one person who was definitely awake. And whatever he said, he saw the man nodding like this. He said, oh, he agrees with this. But then a few seconds later, he saw him going like this. Oh, he disagrees. That means I have to reinforce my point, say it again and again and again. But at every moment he sees, some moments, the head is going like this, seeming agreement, and other moments going like this. Every time there's a disagreement, he presents a new argument. The lecture goes on for hours and hours. And eventually he's exhausted his subject. He finishes off. And he's intrigued because there's this mixture. Some things this man is agreeing with, nodding his head. The other thing he seems to be disagreeing with it. So he asked this person, tell me, why do you agree with some things, disagree with other things? What is your actual position? Oh, says the farmer, I'm a simple man. I'm just a peasant. And I look after goats. But you see, my most prized goat went missing. And then in a certain light, at a certain angle, you looked like my goat. And every time the light changed, I thought, there's my goat. And I nodded. And when the light changed and the angle was changed, he said, no, that's not my goat. This is one thing I know, you are a goat, but you're not my goat. So all this useless thing was being taught. You see, so when we have a conversation with others and ourselves, we have to be sure that we're not a goat, useless, dull, that we're saying something sensible, something valuable. Let's not just talk for the sake of talking. So this whole weekend, this whole day, we have to try to keep as silent as possible. What's the value of silence? Value of silence is we have the capacity to evaluate the state of mind that we're in. And when silence and quietude seeps to us, then we have the opportunity of revealing in that quiet moment the silent voice of God, the quietude, the settlement. Instead of the mind jumping here and there, we can at least settle the mind just by creating an atmosphere and evaluating ourselves and seeing how much of this willpower do we have. So when we talk of tapasya, and yesterday I was talking of the story of Vishwamitra that is contained in the Ramayana, the story of Rama, and how much tapasya he did. Now tapasya, or exercising willpower, is another word for it, another phrase for it, doesn't guarantee spirituality, it doesn't guarantee holiness. It's simply, and there's some examples. Today there's a marathon, a ladies' marathon going on. So you advised us of this, and you said that how people might find it awkward to get here because routes might change and so on. If you go through Phoenix Park, undoubtedly your route will change. Imagine the willpower now of running 10, even a small marathon, a mini marathon is about 10 kilometers. What willpower is necessary to do that? We started off raising funds here by doing a cycle ride over 4 days, 620 kilometers. What willpower is necessary? Well, you see, it could be an unpleasant thing. You could find that at the end of it, and I asked one marathon runner who runs regularly in these marathons. So I noticed when you run past that your breath is being labored. How are you feeling? He says, I'm feeling that my lungs are going to burst. I'm feeling it is so sore, so uncomfortable. I don't really want to go on anymore, but I'm pushing myself. And every time I hit my foot on the tarmac, I'm jarring my knee, and I have a knee problem now. But still, I'm gritting my teeth and going to the end, because at the end, I feel so good that I achieved this. So it requires tremendous willpower to go through a barrier of pain. And this is just to run a marathon and get a medal of some kind of recognition. Now, if we can do that in terms of physical activities, or in terms of, pushing the boundaries of the physical, and we understand the reward is after the fact, but we're prepared to do it right now. Imagine now developing that level of willpower in a different direction, in a way of controlling the mind. All tapasya essentially is controlling the mind. And even that marathon was controlling the mind. Even that marathon was steering our attention and concentration in such a way that we go through the pain barriers. But what's the reward at the end? Not really much. But when you do the same activity with this idea in mind, some internal revelation will happen. So all spiritual activity, all this tapasya, all of this yoga directed either towards taking the emotions and steering it toward an opening avenue where the emotions bring out a sweetness, a delivery to us of the sweetness of a love of God. The sweetest kind of self-discipline you can manage. It's not really self-discipline in that case. That's why it's easiest. That's why it's preferable. That's why in the 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, weighing up the two options, it says, why don't you fix your mind on me? And this phrase, fixing your mind on a personal God, is used multiple times in the Bhagavad Gita. 18th chapter emphasizes it as a summary of the Bhagavad Gita. Because it is the easiest path, because you don't have to impose some difficulty on you. You're simply going through a process of sublimation, taking the emotions and the feelings and redirecting it in a sweeter way. That is a beautiful thing. I came across a dialogue, I think I've told you a number of times. I was going to the airport and the driver wanted the opportunity for some spiritual advice. He says, it seems that I am directed to do more tapasya. So I said, are you a devotee? He says, oh yes, I'm a devotee. I said, what does that mean? And we came round to understanding what a devotee means, developing a love of God. If you develop a love for something, then all your other things get left by themselves. Like conquering your shadow, psychological speak, or all your baggage carried forward. You don't conquer your shadow by shooting it, by ambushing it, by giving it a lecture. You simply face the sun and walk toward it. Ramakrishna gives a slightly different example. The more you walk toward the east, the more the west is left behind. So you move toward that, and the other things get left off. Supposing you, in the youth of teenagehood, have an attraction towards somebody, and then somebody else comes along, and you have another attraction for the person. What becomes of your attraction for the first person? It gets left behind automatically. In childhood, we understand this. As we grow up, formerly we had a love and attraction for toys. But now, in adulthood, automatically we've left this behind. Our more mature position values other things. So this is a wonderful path where tapasya actually is almost automatic, but require the self-will initially to develop such a thing. And then supposing you are karma yogi, it requires a certain discipline not to attend to the multiple hundreds and thousands of things in the future. You take one thing. The trick question is, how many things do you have to do today? Somebody says, oh, let me think, at least 25 things. No, one thing, and then another thing, and then another thing. Operating your life in such a way that you're not disturbed in anxiety in a time frame, either by the past or the future. That you do the activities not impetuously, but systematically in a planned way, but now, with full appreciation of now. If you happen to make it sweeter by making karma bhakti, that is, offering all your fruits of your activities toward your most beloved God, then you add an extra sweetness to it. And then supposing you're a jnana yogi, intellectually orientated, then what is the tapasya necessary? It is the discipline of discernment. In any case, the Bhagavad Gita gives us a series of tapas. It tells us that there is physical willpower has to be exerted. What does it comprise of? This very devotion and love of God, appreciating all the manifesting forms of God, that is nature itself, split up, seemingly fragmented into waves, divine waves coming toward you. Supposing you have that mindset, you look at the world very differently. You'll see it as fragmented God. And then honoring those people worthy of honoring, teachers, the ones who are dedicated to spiritual life, and so on. So this is physical tapasya. These are some examples of it. And then what about the other more subtle thing? Tapasya of speech. When you speak to somebody, it's not just communication. When you speak to somebody, why don't you give an extra value and leave them in a happier state Why aren't your words as sweet as possible, as uplifting as possible, so that you become a beaming atmosphere wherever you go of upliftment and joy? That would be the best value of speech. But what we tend to do without this self-control, what do we tend to do? We tend to bring people down by talking about all the negative things we hear on the news. And becoming examples of maybe, perhaps, it's a little unfair. Never mind, I don't mind. When I was in Africa, in Malawi, I told people to come out of the mindset of post-colonial thinking and say, you can't make an excuse and say, oh, it's Africa. Fill your potholes in and have self-confidence. There's a tiny island that is overcrowded with notoriously bad weather, and they call themselves Great Britain. You should also say we are great and carry on like this. See? How are you? Not too bad. Well, okay. Why don't you say something else? The Irish have it well, I'm grand. See the beautiful Irish expression, I'm grand. Not thank you, thanks a million. See? So what wonderful expressions we have. Leaving a person happier so that they want to come within your environment because they feel blessed. Why? Because you have an insight into their nature. You see there, everything is blissful at the end of it. When you have a penetrating vision and see beyond the borders of the physical and the psychological and the emotional, where all this pain and suffering is there, behind it all is purity and perfection and bliss. Why don't you have a look and see it in this way? So this will come about through all of these different approaches. If you're a bhakti, you'll see the Lord of the universe sitting there. If you're a jnani, you'll see the flow, divine flow, operating through all hands and eyes and heads. And if you are a karma yogi, you'll see this grace being expressed through the activity of limbs and thoughts and all the various scenes presented toward you for a calmness of mind. So this tapasya of speech is there. Some examples are there like that. And then what about tapasya of mind? Silence. What we'll be practicing today is mona, silence. Become a muni. If you're a rishi, you'll be a muni also, a silent person. Why? Because there's the English phrase, empty vessels make the most noise. And you're continuously having conversations in your own mind. What should we do in meditation? Meditation being common to all the systems. We should learn to quiet these waves. The whole of Dhyana Yoga, Raja Yoga, is the discipline of calming the voices, the internal voices, a little bit more, making them sweeter. And there in the ultimate depths of silence, there you'll discover your own true immortal self, your infinite invisible. So it is necessary to look at the condition of the mind as it's chatting away, either involved in temptations and desires, or involved in fearful situations, which are all imaginary. One of the great varieties of waves in the Sankhya and Patanjali Yoga Sutra system, the philosophy which is there, joint philosophies, one borrowing from the other, using, and for everybody actually, using the geography of the mental field. What does it look like? One variety of wave is curious. It's called verbal delusion. It means we talk ourselves into a tempting or fearful or doubtful scenario. Can't blame something else. We ourselves are talking ourselves into it. And two key words come out. What? If and but. The what is what if. If and but. If only this. Are you well? I would be well if I would been born under a lucky star. But unfortunately, it's not the case. These two words should be banned from your language because they create doubt and fear. And doubt and fear is what we are plagued with. Unnecessarily, we require imagination for these to rise. Because what if and but is to do with the past, and if is to do with the future. You eliminate these and engage in this present moment where you'll find perfection, where you'll find your own true divine nature, tuning into that. So what is this tapasya at the end of the day in summary? It is the art of tuning the attention into the divine constantly and noticing when it wanders off and retuning it again, until it becomes habitually tuned. Like tuning into a radio station, a radio broadcast. And when it goes off and the bandwidth seems to change, you retune it to the correct bandwidth. And then you get a good broadcast, fine tuning. You start off with broad tuning. Where is the channel broadly speaking? This is the same in spiritual life. And then you start refining it. This broad tuning in the Patanjali yoga system is called yama, control, self-control. What is it comprised of? 5 things, 5 broad things. Now these can be expanded, and today is Pentecost, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention it. So Pentecost actually means the 50th day. For the Jewish community, it's the 50th day after the Passover. For Christians, it's the 50th day after Easter. Why do we have all these periodic festivals? There are so many layers and levels because it's not just commemorating for the Jewish people 50th day. It's also commemorating the wheat harvest. It's all tuned to the agricultural conditions, the seasons, and going one step further and seeing the divine creator within all of these things and manifesting as seasons. Imagine if you didn't have seasons. Imagine if you didn't have rainfall. Imagine if you didn't have sunshine. These are all manifestations of divine grace, all geared toward our own self-discovery. What a wonderful arrangement. We should take advantage of it, don't you think? You have a body that is an instrument to discover it. You have a subtle tuning instrument, capacity to tune, called mind. But take advantage of it, please. Instead of using it as a dumping ground for people's complaints, or instead of encouraging yourself in the whats and the ifs, all the doubting things. We have the capacity to elevate the mind. We have the capacity to transmute discord into harmony, to take all the so-called compost of life and make a rose flower out of it. Only man has this capacity. No other creature has this capacity. They have the capacity to adapt, no doubt. But we have to go through the ups and downs. I was listening to some conversation it was really atheist and Christian. And the atheist asked the most awkward question you can ask. Why is there so much misery and suffering in the world? Why did God make such a stupid universe where we have to make all these adjustments and go through all this discomfort and pain? And the Christian couldn't really easily answer and said, initially, he gave a stalling answer. Stalling answer means, that's a very interesting question. It's another way of saying, I don't really know. I haven't got a clue. But the difficulty is, it's assuming, both sides are assuming, a creator God separate from this world, not some entity that made the world and entered into it, himself or itself. So that what we see as the universe is not separate. And we go from this dual system and to a qualified non-dualism that sees this intimate connection and sees this grace flowing to our benefit, for our benefit. And so once we notice that, a thankfulness arises in us. And the more we engender this sense of thankfulness and spiritual elevation, the more the mind gets shaped according to this. And the body also gets shaped. Every cell of the body, we did a meditation. Every cell, every molecule gets transformed. into something positive, vibrates. Won't you be healthy when that happens? Won't you have this vitality? The greatest difficulty today, the greatest question today, with the greatest amount of investment, even involving such big companies as Google and so on, is can we seek more, at least more, immortality, if that makes any sense? The road to immortality, what do I mean? Physical immortality. It turns out, you see, that there are what we call blue areas on the planet. These are areas where people, on average, live much longer. Then you investigate, why is it? See, at the end of a strand of a DNA are telomeres. They're kind of like a shoelace with a small hard portion on the end to keep the lace from going into fibers and being destroyed. And it seems that as you grow older, these telomeres get shorter. But in these blue areas, they're long. Now, why are they? That's a different matter. Is it diet? But I can tell you, it must be a different way of thinking. Many factors will be involved, no doubt, but thinking will be a primary factor. In fact, probably the most fundamental factor. As you think, so you become. That is it. If you think that in front of you is your most favorite luncheon meal, it won't be long before saliva flows in the mouth and gastric juice flows in the stomach. It's instant. Similarly, if you feel and think that the glorious cosmic sun is shining on you and every movement is inundated with this, that every cell and molecule of the body is saturated, is a fragmented version of this divine. Constantly think of this. Constantly think that the environment is provided out of love for you, for your own self-growth and development. Constantly thank the sun for shining. Thank the moon for creating various seasons and movements and mental moods. How engender and cultivate the sense of thankfulness, sense of wonder, adoration, and thankfulness. See what happens to your life. It'll change. You will draw in that same toward you. So this is a message I gave also on Tuesday when I gave a talk on the spirituality of health and healing. We have a choice, therefore. We have a choice to think in one of two ways. Either, as Tyagaraja suggests, going towards the preferable path, as it's described in Kathopanishad, or the pleasurable. These are the two things. The pleasurable, no doubt, is attractive, because moving toward that gives you your temporary ice cream. But moving toward the preferable gives a long-term sweetness, a transformation in the human psyche that has its ultimate rewards. What are these rewards? Peace of mind, settlement, a state of joy. All of these things everybody is looking for. It's only they think it's in the sense satisfaction that it happens. Sense satisfaction is important, no doubt, but don't be attached to it. That's the message. And so this whole question of cultivating willpower, what we call tapasya, is directed toward that. Imagine something that is out of control. Imagine a society that is out of control. Imagine a child that is out of control. Same thing, your mind out of control is a chaotic, self-destructive mode. So be careful to cultivate it correctly. This is the importance of exercising self-will, self-control, what is called tapasya. Tapasya itself means causing heat. How do you cause heat? Friction is required. Every time you apply friction, you get heat. Why are we so resistant to it? Because it requires friction. And every friction will cause a rebellion. We'll rebel against it. We don't like change. Nobody likes change. There was, in France, somebody did an exercise about walking backwards instead of forwards, and how do you like it? Very unnatural thing. Some people go on a train or a bus and don't wish to go backwards. They want to go forwards. They say, I feel dizzy and unbalanced if I go backwards. All right. Whether it's true or not, that's fine. That's how you feel. Nobody likes change. The useful exercise that I have done with some people, if you're wearing a jacket or a shirt and you know which arm you put in first and which arm you put in second, now please take your item of clothing and take it in the opposite way you're used to taking it off and see how comfortable you'll find. You'll be very awkward. Or you see, I have the habit of wearing my watch here on my left arm. Supposing you say, Swami, just as an experiment, please put it in the other arm. And then 1 hour later you say, what's the time? Naturally, I'll look at my left arm. Oh, watch is not there. I might look, where's my watch? Not noticing it's on the other arm. Nobody likes change. And yet there's no growth without change. So we have to be prepared and resolved to change. That means the first step is to see reasonably, is there a reason why we should change? Everybody has a reason to change. And change happens by itself in an evolutionary way. Evolution, this is a different way that the yogis describe evolution. Swami Vivekananda has this to say, even in his time where evolution is a hot topic. He says, in the matter of the projection of Akasha and Prana. What is Akasha and Prana? The yogis resolved everything back to primordial substance. Whose characteristic is space. What is space? Space is really the field for matter. That's how they viewed it. And then you have something called prana, that is, all things are resolved into energy. This is modern science, or at least science of 1905 onwards, where Einstein declares the most famous equation that everybody knows, which is E equals m. Yes, forget about the c squared. It has no relevance. E equals m. Everything is energy. Well, the yogis knew it. Swami Vivekananda also knew it and asked his friend Nikola Tesla, is there some way that you can make a formula to prove this? And obviously Nikola Tesla never did it. Einstein did it. So in the matter of projection of Akasha and Prana into manifested form and return to a fine state, there is a good deal of similarity between Indian thought and modern science, even in his day. The moderns have their evolution, and so have the yogis. But I think that the yogis' explanation of evolution is the better one. The change of one species into another is attained by the infilling of nature. He's quoting Patanjali Yoga Sutras. The moderns have their evolution and so on. But I think that the yogi's explanation of evolution is the better one. He says, the change of one species into another is attained by the infilling of nature. Now, what does that mean? This is a flow theory of evolution. And what is its relevance to my mention of Pentecost? See, from the Christian point of view, well, from the Jewish point of view, Pentecost is also celebrating Moses' 10 Commandments, the rescue of enslaved people from Egypt, and so on and so forth. It's highly significant. The Passover itself is a celebration of that. And 50 days later, that's recalled again. And so therefore, it celebrates all the truths of the Torah. Now, it so happened that the early Christian community, when Christ had gone, were also in a room somewhere, celebrating this feast as Jews. And then we see an influx, like this. Just as evolution is an infilling of nature, now we find an infilling of what is called spirit. What is spirit? Spirit is divine energy, which yogis are calling prana. It is divine grace inspiring, filling us and inspiring us and lifting us to another level of the evolutionary process. But the evolutionary process is not introducing something new, not giving us something that is not already there. So we have to look at this Christian event in a different way. We have to see that it is more like the infilling of nature, an inspiration where a collective upliftment occurs And that means an opening has to take place where obstacles are removed. What is the primary obstacle? Distrust, doubt, fear. When you remove these, there's an infilling, a surge within. And it is compared in Patanjali to peasant fields, where water is required to move along channels from a certain reservoir, moving along channels that fills and gives water to the crops. It's not that you have to go laboriously and take buckets of water and water your crops in this way. No, you remove the obstacle and then the water flows in by itself. Divine grace will flow in by itself. And the incident in the Acts of the Apostles is characterized by tongues of fire along with the Spirit, tongues of fire, something like a wind moving. It's an ancient Jewish concept, ruach. That is, God's making the world and then breathing life over it. Same concept, prana. Divine breath, infusing everything with life. We did a small meditation this morning on that very subject. This prana, infusing everything with its life. But it's not just energy, it's divine energy. This E equals M is describing, this is divine energy. Ask a scientist what is energy. They won't be able to tell you. They'll only be able to tell you the effects of it. The effects of it may be potential energy, kinetic energy, radiational energy, electromagnetism. The yogis put it as 5 things. One science has combined electricity and magnetism, made one thing. So they had that. The only thing they left out was strong and weak nuclear forces. But if you really take it, modern science may well discover that these are electromagnetic as well. So, all right, these 5 forces, as it were, are simply what we call subtle elements, tanmatras, the energetic side of tanmatras, mere elements, divine graces in 5 different waveforms, progressively combining till we have the world that we see. Don't think that this world that we see is confined to space and time. It's only a mechanism, a structure, a woven structure that we look through, the kind of veil that we look through to interpret the world. And when we interpret the world, then we can have children and eat and drink and so on and so forth. We can live life according to our species. But where is the species coming from? It's coming from the removal of obstacles. So the basic idea is that we are changing from one species to another, says Swami Vivekananda, and that man is the highest species. Patanjali explains this infilling of nature by the simile of peasants irrigating fields. Our education and progression simply mean taking away the obstacles, and by its own nature, the divinity will manifest itself. We don't have to go to a divine shop. Please give me the grace. Please remove, give me something more. It's already there, already full and free. Your nature is already the infinite invisible. You just express it. So what is tapasya in this case? Removing obstacles. This does away with all the struggle for existence, it says. The miserable experiences of life are simply in the way and can be eliminated entirely. They are not necessary for evolution. Even if they did not exist, we should progress. It is in the very nature of things to manifest themselves. We can say every atom is moving toward its own freedom. He says this in another place. It is in the very nature of things to manifest themselves. The momentum is not from outside, but comes from inside. And then he goes, each soul is the sum total of the universal experiences, already coiled up there. Yogic term, kundali, coiled up. And of all these experiences, only those will come out which find suitable circumstances. What a wonderful description. So it looks like a change. It looks like evolution. But actually it's not. When we see the whole totality, all the changes are simply the internal potential moving, as it were, and naturally removing these obstacles by the urgency of its own inner motivation, its own inner will to express. It'll come. So what are we doing when we engage in spiritual life and practice called yoga? All we're doing is we're acting as a catalyst. We're quickening the movement toward freedom. And when we quicken the movement toward freedom, we lessen our pain. Freedom from what? Freedom from constrictions that cause a painful existence, a difficult life. Make your life full and free. It's already there, just waiting expression. And the old example would be my example of the frog scientists looking for the professor to introduce a cone and interpret it as it's lowered into the water as a point that evolves into a circle, that evolves into a bigger circle, bigger circle, bigger circle, until finally the cone is no longer, because they never saw the cone in its totality. So if I want to pull a little fun, and people say, are you a creationist or an evolutionist? I said, well, I don't believe in evolution and I don't believe in creation. I believe in manifestation. I believe in this movement forward, this expression that we call Sisti, that is this expressive form. And I don't believe in evolution either, because how can I? I believe in totality. It only looks like it's evolving, but actually is a totality. Now, we have to go some way to view it in this way, but how do we do that? We do it by removing our constrictions. What is Pentecost? Opening yourself to grace. And their expression then is what happened from there amongst these apostles, including the mother of Jesus, Mary was there. People come to Jerusalem at that point from all different nations, all speaking different languages. And what do these apostles find? The fire within them is able to communicate the spirituality without words. Of course, it's interpreted as speaking different languages. But when the spirit is there, you don't need a language, because the spirit has no borders. There's no boundary in the electromagnetic field. That form of energy has no boundaries. And it's all divine energy. And the more subtle you go, the less boundaries, the less complications, the simpler you go. Until in the yogic way of understanding, you have this akasha. That's all. And when this akasha combines, because it's affected by eternal energy, divine energy, then that potential energy becomes kinetic. And then the kinetic energy, by its movement, becomes radiational energy. And that radiational energy becomes electricity and becomes magnetism, otherwise interpreted as water and earth. Don't take it literally. So this is the wonderful expression that is there now about this Vedanta movement, that it teaches these things relevant to the whole of humanity. We cannot teach it unless we are infused with the same spirit. The same spirit, the same alliance, the same tuning in, effectively removing all our obstacles. We don't do it by preaching. We don't do it by being a goat. We do it by reforming our own lives, being a product of our own product, tuning our own spiritual life. That becomes a powerful example to others, number one. But two, it has the effect that these apostles have. It has a converting effect. The narrative goes on to say how many thousands of people were converted that day. Converted to what? Converted to attunement to their own inner spirit. This Holy Spirit that arrives and converts others. It's not people that did it. The Spirit did it. So it's the Spirit that is flowing through us. This prana, this divine energy is flowing through us. Every movement of the hand, every thought that arises is its expression. So let us try to engage in this process of tuning in progressively, knowing that the possibility of a flash of inspiration can arrive. How long must we wait? Sri Ramakrishna's example, a cave can be dark for 1,000 years. How long does it take to light it? You strike a match. Finished. It can happen instantaneously through the grace of the divine, the grace of the Guru, and so on. All of this can happen. But for most people, it shouldn't happen that way, because if you realize God today, you'll have a military coup against him tomorrow. So rather do it progressively, please, step by step, and do what the great philosopher Nissan suggests. Life is a journey. Enjoy the ride. Enjoy the process. Find out the glory and wonder and beauty in it, and engage in it in a systematically progressive, delightful, blissful way. This Holy Spirit in us reveals, is a revealer. And we can catch it maybe even just for an instant. In meditation, there's no time frame in it. In the meditation we did earlier, we might see that we catch this absolute state of experiencing pure being. It may be for a flash. It may be for 5 minutes if we review it. We have no knowledge of it. It might be for an hour. Who cares? But the fact that it is in there, within us, means that we can tune into it, and that it is there. And it is there sometimes when we least expect it. It is there when we look at a flower. It can be there when we look at a sunrise or a sunset. It can be there when we see or when we hear of some inspirational moment or story. And then suddenly a flash comes, a flash of inspiration. In the language of the yogis, a small amount of this divine energy has found its way into the Sushumna and left again, like the mercury rising on a thermometer and falling. When we sustain that, one question that somebody asked, and the question I think is here, is it necessary to unfold this kundali or feminine kundalini? Yes, but we have to read Raja Yoga very carefully. Swami Vivekananda says we have to do it, but we can do it through how should we do it? Love of God, and he goes on like that. For most people, love of God, we don't have to go and do this alternate breathing and all this kind of thing. Love of God will do it. But what does it mean? It means unfolding layers and layers of pure consciousness, layers and levels of the mind. That's what it means. Simply put in that symbolic way. So all of this is there. It's now 11:30. So we'll finish off there. So Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Enjoy your weekend. And I hope you got some insight into this special event that is called Whit Sunday or Whitsun, with a great deal of celebrations to do with it traditionally.
Thank you, Swami.
Merci beaucoup, Swami. Enjoy the day, everybody.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Swami.
Bonne journée.